Do you think big changes require big moves? Think again. In today's episode of Earworm English, we reveal the 1% rule, how tiny daily actions can completely transform your life. We'll break down why most people stay stuck and how small, consistent steps, not giant leaps, create real progress. Plus, we'll challenge you to start your own 1% improvement today. Before we dive in, hit like, subscribe, and comment what's one small change you'll make today. Watch till the end for powerful insights. Let's get started.
Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. It's kind of wild to think about, like how those big ambitious goals we all have, well, they really all start with just like one small step, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And for anyone out there who's learning English, which can be a pretty daunting thing, it's a whole new language, just remember, every expert was once a beginner.
Absolutely.
So today we're going to dig into this really cool idea, how those little everyday choices we make, they actually have the power to create some pretty big changes in our lives. And yeah, that goes for your English skills too, by the way.
Right. So in this deep dive, we've been looking at some pretty fascinating ideas from, a variety of different sources.
Yeah.
And what we really want to try to understand is, why do we sometimes feel stuck? Like we're just not moving forward in life or with our goals, like learning English.
Yeah.
But more importantly, we want to talk about how you can actually start making some real progress, even if it's just baby steps, little by little, day by day. So our mission today is to take all these big ideas from the material we've been looking at and try to make them super practical and helpful for you, our listener.
Yeah.
So you can see how these small, consistent efforts can really add up to some pretty incredible results in the long run.
Okay, so let's break this down a little. Why do we sometimes feel like we're just spinning our wheels, especially when we're trying to learn something new, like English? I mean, it can feel pretty overwhelming at times.
It definitely can.
Our source has actually highlighted a few common reasons why people get stuck. And the first one is something I think we can probably all relate to, at least to some extent. It's the fear of failure. That voice in your head that says, what if I try and I just totally bomb? What if I'm just not good at this?
Yeah, that fear can be so paralyzing.
Yeah.
But the material we've been looking at really emphasizes that making mistakes is actually a vital part of learning anything.
Right.
It's not the opposite of success. It's more like a stepping stone on the path to success. If you think about it, so many successful people in all kinds of fields, they've all faced setbacks, they've made mistakes.
Absolutely.
What sets them apart is that they didn't let those setbacks define them. They kept going, they learned from their mistakes, and they kept pushing forward.
Absolutely. It's about having that resilience, that ability to bounce back.
Exactly.
Okay, so fear of failure is definitely a big one. But another reason we might feel stuck is simply not knowing where to begin.
Right.
You might really want to improve your English, but you kind of look at everything you need to learn, the vocabulary, the grammar, the pronunciation is like, whoa, where do I even start?
It can feel like a huge mountain to climb.
It's like wanting to travel to this amazing far-off country you've always dreamed of, but you don't even know how to find it on a map, so you just kind of stay put.
Yeah, and that brings up a really important question, and this is something for you, the listener, to consider. Does that perfect starting point, that clear roadmap, does it ever just magically appear? Because from what we've been reading, it seems like more often than not, it's actually the act of just starting with something small that creates that direction.
Right.
Maybe you decide, okay, I'm going to try this new English learning app for just 5 minutes today.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you listen to a short English podcast on your way to work.
Right.
Even those small actions can give you a sense of momentum, a feeling of okay, I'm doing something. And that can often help you see what the next logical step might be.
So it's like taking that first step out the door and then the path starts to unfold.
Yeah, exactly like that.
Okay, and then there's this other sneaky thing that can really keep us stuck. It's our own inner critic, those negative thoughts we have about ourselves. Like, oof, I'm never going to understand English grammar. Or, my pronunciation is just hopeless. I sound terrible.
Yeah, that inner voice can be so harsh.
And those thoughts can be really powerful in holding us back from making progress. They can make us feel like it's just not even worth trying.
And what's interesting, if you look at the bigger picture of how our minds work, you see that these negative self-statements can actually become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
If you keep telling yourself, I can't do this, I'm not good at this, your brain tends to, well, believe it, right?
Yeah.
And you might not even try as hard because you've already convinced yourself that you're going to fail.
It's like putting up your own roadblocks before you even start the journey.
Exactly.
Okay, and then there's this huge one that I know I've struggled with a lot myself, and that's waiting for motivation to just like magically appear.
Oh, I know that feeling.
We think, okay, I'll really start learning English seriously once I feel like it. But what our sources are saying is that motivation actually works in the opposite way.
That's a really crucial point to grasp because we often think, okay, I need to feel motivated first and then I'll take action.
Mm-hmm.
But what we see time and time again is that motivation isn't usually the starting point. It's actually what comes after you take action.
Yeah.
So even if you don't feel super excited about it at first, when you actually start doing something, even if it's small, you'll often find that your motivation starts to grow as you start to see some progress.
So it's like that feeling of, oh, hey, I can actually do this. Maybe this isn't so bad after all. And suddenly you're like more into it.
Exactly. The action creates the motivation.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the reasons why we might get stuck in our English learning or in any area of life, really.
Right.
But how do we actually start moving forward? And this is where this concept of the 1% rule comes in.
Yeah.
And I think this is a really encouraging way to think about making progress. It's the idea that you don't need to make these huge sweeping changes all at once. Just focus on making very small improvements each day, even just 1% better than you were yesterday.
And what's fascinating is that those small changes, they don't just add up in a straight line. They actually compound over time.
Yeah.
The material we looked at highlighted that if you improve just a little bit each day over a longer period, like a year, you could actually be something like 37 times better than you were when you started.
That's incredible.
It's amazing to see how these seemingly insignificant improvements can create such significant growth in the long run.
And this idea of small, consistent steps, it actually ties in really well with how we form habits and even how we see ourselves. Like James Clear, in his book Atomic Habits, he talks about how those tiny everyday habits, those little things we do consistently, they actually shape our identity.
Yeah, I love that book.
So if you can make it a habit to, say, read something in English for just 10 minutes every day, or practice speaking for 5 minutes, those small actions actually start to change how you think about yourself. You start to see yourself as someone who is actively learning and using English.
That's a really important point
Mm-hmm.
because it's not just about reaching a specific goal in English. It's about becoming the type of person who consistently does the things that will help them improve.
Yep.
It's like those small habits are like little votes that you're casting for the kind of English speaker you want to be.
I love that analogy. It's like every time you practice, even just for a short time, you're reinforcing that identity. Like, yes, this is who I am. I'm an English learner.
And that can have a ripple effect on other areas of your life as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's about developing that growth mindset, that belief in your ability to learn and grow.
Okay, so speaking of mindset, that's a huge part of making those small changes a lasting part of our lives.
It really is.
It's about the way we think about our own abilities.
Right.
And our sources talked about the difference between what's called a fixed mindset and a growth mindset.
Yes.
So, can you explain a little bit more about how these two ways of thinking can impact our English learning or any kind of learning, really?
Sure. So a fixed mindset is essentially the belief that your abilities, your intelligence, those things are pretty much set in stone. You're born with a certain amount of talent, and that's it.
Yeah.
So someone with a fixed mindset, they might say something like, oh, I'm just not a language person. I'm never going to be good at English.
Right.
But a growth mindset, on the other hand, is the belief that you can actually develop your abilities, you can get better at things through hard work, through practice, and by learning from your mistakes.
So, someone with a growth mindset might think, oh, learning English is tough for sure, but I know that if I keep practicing, I will get better.
Exactly. It's about embracing the challenge, knowing that you can grow and improve over time.
And it sounds like our mindset can really make or break our English learning journey and how much progress we believe we can make.
It absolutely can. And the material we've been diving into, it really highlights that our brains are incredibly responsive to the messages we feed them. And this brings in a fascinating concept called the Reticular Activating System, or RAS.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about this.
You can think of it as a filter in your brain. And this filter, it helps you focus on the things that you tell it are important.
Okay, so the RAS is like a spotlight that shines on what we tell it to pay attention to.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it.
So how does this RAS actually play out in like our everyday lives, especially when we're learning something new like English? Can you give us an example?
Sure. Have you ever had this happen? You learn a new word in English, maybe you saw it in a lesson or someone used it in a conversation, and then it's like all of a sudden you start hearing that word everywhere.
Oh, yeah, totally. It's like it was always there, but I just never noticed it before.
That's likely your RAS at work. Once you've focused your attention on that new word, your brain is primed to notice it. So it starts picking it up more frequently in your environment.
So it's not that the word is suddenly appearing more often, it's that our brains are tuned into it now.
Right. And the same thing happens with our thoughts about learning English. If you constantly focus on the negative, I can't do this, I'm not good at this, your RAS might start to filter in more examples of the things you don't understand.
What?
And you might actually overlook the progress that you are making because you're so focused on the negative.
So it's like we're training our brains to find evidence for what we believe, whether it's positive or negative.
Exactly.
But what happens if we consciously try to shift our focus to more positive, encouraging thoughts?
Right.
Like instead of saying, I'll never get this, we start telling ourselves, okay, I am improving, maybe just a little bit each day, but I am moving forward. What happens to our RAS then?
Well, when you start focusing on the idea that you are improving,
Yeah.
even in small ways, your RAS starts to look for evidence to support that belief.
Oh, interesting.
You might notice that you understood a little more of that English movie you watched, or that you were able to express yourself a bit more clearly in a simple conversation.
Right.
By focusing on growth and progress, you're basically training your brain to see the positive changes you're making. And this can give you a huge boost in motivation.
And it can help us stay on track and keep putting in the effort.
Absolutely.
Okay, so instead of waiting for that perfect moment to really start practicing English or to make any kind of change in our lives, the key takeaway here seems to be just taking some kind of action right now, even if it feels small or insignificant.
That's such a powerful message.
Yeah.
Because so often we wait for things to be perfect, or we wait for ourselves to feel totally ready before we take action. But the reality is that moment might never come.
Yeah.
And the materials we looked at really emphasized that progress often comes before confidence.
So it's like we don't have to feel confident to start, but the act of starting actually helps us build confidence.
Exactly. Think about someone who's learning English. They might be really nervous about speaking because they're worried about making mistakes, but it's through actually speaking, even if they stumble a bit along the way, that they start to gain confidence as they realize, hey, I can communicate, people can understand me.
And there's this great quote that I came across in our research that really captures this idea. It said, "Done is better than perfect."
I love that. It's so simple, but it's so true. It really takes the pressure off, right?
Absolutely.
Because we don't have to get everything exactly right before we even begin. Starting, even if it's messy, even if it's imperfect, it allows us to learn, to adapt as we go, and to build that momentum that we were talking about earlier.
Okay, now another thing our sources touched on that I found really interesting is how much the environment around us can actually influence our ability to make changes and stick to our goals.
It's true. Our environment plays a huge role.
There's that famous saying, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with."
Yeah, I've heard that one. It's powerful, isn't it?
It really is. It suggests that the people we surround ourselves with, the kinds of information we consume, those things can actually have a big impact on our mindset, our habits, our motivation, even our beliefs.
Definitely. And for someone learning English, if you're constantly around people who are negative or who don't believe in the importance of learning or personal growth, you'd be really tough to stay positive and focused on your own language goals.
So it's like we need to be mindful of the energy that we're allowing into our space.
Absolutely.
So, what are some practical things that, we as English learners, or really anyone who wants to create positive change, what can we do to cultivate a more supportive environment for ourselves?
Well, the materials we looked at offered some great actionable ideas. And one of the first things they suggested is to really be intentional about seeking out positive influences, sources of inspiration.
Right.
So for an English learner, this could mean regularly listening to English language podcasts, like this one, hopefully,
Course.
or reading books and articles in English by people who inspire you, or even following social media accounts that share positive, helpful content for English learners.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's about consciously choosing to expose yourself to content that encourages you, that motivates you, that lifts you up.
So it's about like being really deliberate about curating the information that we're feeding our minds.
Exactly. And another great suggestion was to connect with other people who are also on a similar journey.
Yeah.
So find other people who are learning English or who have already achieved a level of fluency that you admire. You could join online forums or language exchange groups.
Mm,
Maybe there are local conversation clubs in your area where you can practice speaking with others.
right.
Connecting with a community of like-minded people, that can be incredibly supportive and encouraging. It can give you a sense of belonging. You can learn from other people's experiences. You can share your own challenges. You can celebrate each other's successes.
It's like having a team of cheerleaders who are also on the same path as you.
Exactly. And then on the flip side of that, it's also important to be aware of the negative influences in your environment.
Yeah, like the energy vampires.
Exactly. And while you can't always completely avoid negativity, it's helpful to, try to limit your exposure to people who are constantly complaining
Yeah.
or to media that just drains your energy.
So be mindful of who and what you're allowing into your space.
Exactly. Guard your energy.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, our listener, with this question. Think about your English learning journey, or maybe there's another area of your life where you're feeling a little stuck. What is one small change that you've been wanting to make but have been putting off? Maybe it's spending just 5 minutes a day practicing your pronunciation or learning a couple of new vocabulary words. Or maybe it's just making a conscious decision to listen to one English song every day and really try to understand the lyrics.
And the key is to take that small step today, not tomorrow, not next week, but right now. Because that first action, that's often the hardest one to take, but it's what gets the ball rolling. And as we talked about earlier, that momentum can really build your confidence.
So, just to recap everything we've talked about today, you have more power than you might realize to shape your progress in learning English or in any area of life, really,
Okay.
by making small, consistent changes, by cultivating a growth mindset, and by surrounding yourself with a supportive environment. You can create some pretty amazing transformations in your life.
And the key takeaway from all the material we looked at is that learning and growth are usually gradual processes.
Yeah.
Big changes rarely happen overnight, but every small step you take, every bit of effort you put in, it's moving you closer to your goals.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on. What's one very specific, very small action you can take today towards your English learning goals? Even if it feels tiny, even if it feels insignificant, what can you do right now to move yourself forward? Even just a little bit.
And as you think about that small step, consider how it fits into the bigger picture of your learning journey. How might that tiny action contribute to your overall growth as an English speaker?
Ponder that, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.
See you then.